Evan Silva, co-founder of Establish the Run. You can listen to that wherever you find your podcast. I especially recommend their latest episode, number 179. It's a much deeper dive of the draft, going team by team. So Evan, let's start there. If you can give us a shortened version, a Cliff Notes version. We've already dissected the top five. We've already dissected some of the quarterbacks. But give us your take on maybe that top five.
Yeah, so I think that 1 and 2 are locked in. I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to the Jaguars for sure. I think that Zach Wilson is going to the Jets for sure. And then the draft starts to get interesting at number 3. You talk to people around the league, they believe it's going to be Mac Jones of Alabama, just a one-year starter in college. But Kyle Shanahan has apparently fallen in love with this guy. But there are also people within the 49ers organization that are pulling for Trey Lance, who is a Patrick Mahomesian talent out of North Dakota State, had 28 touchdown passes and 1 interception in his college career, 16 rushing touchdowns, very few turnovers, can run, is big, powerful, has a powerful arm, but only had 318 pass attempts in his college career. Like Patrick Mahomes last year in the NFL had 660 pass attempts. So, considered to be raw, but also allows them to keep Jimmy Garoppolo for a year to be the sort of placeholder and the bridge until they get to Trey Lance. And they want to keep Jimmy Garoppolo. They truly, they still really, regard him highly. They traded a lot to get him. They paid him a lot of money, but he is the perfect bridge and placeholder to Trey Lance. But I think it's still, I think it's 80% Mac Jones, 20% Trey Lance. I think that people that believe that it might be Justin Fields are going to be, if they're betting on that, they're going to be donating to whatever sports book they're investing in.
Evan, if I can stop you there with Trey Lance, a couple things that I find shady about his draft stock and positioning. This past season was a 1-game season and he didn't play great. Typically they play inside the Fargo Dome. That's indoors. It's passer friendly and it's FCS talent level. So do those 3 factors go against him enough to make a team like the 49ers hesitate?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. Those are all sources of questioning about Trey Lance's future and his scouting report. But he is also a guy that, I mean, I think he's from Minnesota. He's played in the cold weather. If he were to go to San Francisco, he's not playing in the cold weather anyways. Sure. He'll be playing. I mean, maybe when they go to Seattle when it's raining a little bit, but otherwise they play, LA, they play in San Francisco. So that's not really a big knock on him as it pertains to becoming a San Francisco 49er.
Evan, on the defensive side of the ball, who is your favorite? Who do you think is the best bet?
Well, the defensive players don't really come into play until maybe at the earliest number 8 overall to Carolina. And I think more likely number 10 overall to Dallas. Dallas needs defensive personnel big time. They had one of the worst defenses in the league last year. And all they really did was change defensive coordinators from Mike Nolan to Dan Quinn. And that's typically not enough. You need better players. A coach is really only as good as his personnel dictates, and they need more personnel. So I think that Patrick Surtain, a cornerback out of Alabama, J.C. Horn, a cornerback out of South Carolina, Jalen Phillips, Miami, Florida defensive edge rusher. These guys are in play for Dallas at number 10.
You brought up Carolina earlier. The move they're making with Sam Darnold and how they're saying they're going to wait till after the draft. They have until May 3rd to pick up his option. Do you think that this is smokescreens, posturing? Do you think it's trying to create a trade market and give the idea that maybe they're trying to get a quarterback, or do you think they like Darnold and want to stick with him?
Well, I think that they are one of the most interesting teams drafting in the top 10. I think that they're one of the least predictable teams. They could go a number of ways. They could go quarterback. They used their entire draft last year on defensive players. They drafted, I think, 7 or 8 players, all play on defense. They could use offensive line help for sure. I think that actually, if you look at sports books, they are one of the likeliest teams based on the odds to draft a defensive player at number 8 overall. But, again, they could also draft wide receiver. Neither of their current top 2 receivers, Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore, are under contract. past this upcoming season. So they could go a number of different ways. They didn't trade that much to get Sam Darnold, though. They only traded a 6th-round pick this year and a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick next year, which is the equivalent, if you look at the draft value chart, of like the 45th overall pick this year. So that's really not that much. And they don't have big monetary commitments to Sam Darnold. They could have already picked up his option for 2022, which would be $19 million. They haven't done that yet. And they announced publicly today, actually, that they're not going to do that until after the draft, decide whether to pick up that big option. So, hey, if they draft a quarterback, if like Justin Fields falls into their lap, they might not pick up that option on Sam Darnold. And then they've got, two imagine like throwing darts at a board. They've got 2 darts throwing at the board in Sam Darnold and Justin Fields. I think that would actually be an ideal scenario for Carolina.
Evan, what team do you think makes the biggest turnaround this year after who they pick up in the draft?
Well, I think that it very much could be the Broncos, the Denver Broncos. You look at their offensive line took a huge step this past year. I think they're returning almost every starter, and they're bringing back Juwan James, who opted out of the 2020 season at right tackle. He was a big ticket free agent signing for them, and he didn't participate last season. They have the best offensive line coach in the league, Mike Munchak. They have explosiveness at wide receiver and at tight end. Noah Fant, Cortland Sutton's coming back, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, and they're going to have a good defense under Vic Fangio, because Vic Fangio only runs good defenses. And they're getting back Von Miller too, by the way. So they need a quarterback, though. And I think that they know that Drew Lock is not the answer. I think they've actually known that for 2 years. If they can make a move up, I think the Lions at number 7, or maybe even the Falcons up at number 4, could be a trade partner for Denver to go get Justin Fields, Trey Lance, maybe Mac Jones. Whatever one of those quarterbacks falls, I think that could help bring the Broncos over the top. You look at their win total right now on sportsbooks; it's like 6.5, 7 wins. I think this is an 8 to 10 win team, and they're over on win totals is one of my favorite bets entering 2021.
Yeah, Denver needs a quarterback. Cincinnati does not. They have the number 5 pick. Penei Sewell is the top offensive lineman everyone's liking. Yeah. Do you think Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern is a close second? I feel like there's not as much buzz around him.
He is a close second, but I think that Penei Sewell is going to be the first offensive lineman drafted. Even as someone that a couple of weeks ago actually put some money on Rashawn Slater to be the first offensive lineman drafted, I think I'm going to end up donating myself. Okay. So I hope that the sports books use that money wisely. But, the word on the street with the Bengals, and this frustrates me, just as an outside observer of NFL teams, the Bengals, they used the number 1 overall pick on Joe Burrow last year. He took a ton of sacks. He tears his ACL. They've had the worst offensive line in the league for the last decade.
Crazy.
And I don't think they're going to use this number 5 pick on an offensive lineman. I think they're going to go for a wide receiver. I think they're going to draft Jamar Chase out of LSU, who played with Joe Burrow in 2019, actually won the Biletnikoff Award over Justin Jefferson of the Vikings, who was insane as a rookie, but they were playing on the same team. Jamar Chase actually outplayed Justin Jefferson. So I think that's what they're going to do. I think that ownership has stepped in and said, we're going to take the wide receiver. We're going to pair him back with Joe Burrow. I think as an outside observer, that it's malpractice for them not to take an offensive lineman.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think, the Bengals have not been the best decision-making organization for a really long time.
That's the thing. Joe Burrow, he is electric. He comes to life if he has an elite offensive line, and that's been a weakness there so long. It's interesting a fan's take on the draft versus a front office's take on the draft. And like earlier, you mentioned Detroit. They're kind of in a rebuild. And why do you still feel like they're not going to maybe trade down? Because I heard it on your podcast that they still may not give up that number 7 pick because there's kind of an old school mentality. They're not going to sacrifice a season.
Yeah, I mean, they are, they have like a lot of old school football thinkers like Chris Spielman and John Dorsey and Anthony Lynn and Dan Campbell and Dom Capers, all working in their organization. And so, the idea of maybe taking a step back for a year and, doing what the Dolphins did in 2019 and what the Browns did for a couple of years, and you've seen the rise of those organizations, it may not make sense to those old school football thinkers. But if we as outside observers are looking at this, they need to either take a quarterback or trade out. And I think that those are the only two options. I think that they pretty much took on Jared Goff, not as a solution for the future, but as just a short-term solution. And, a guy that the Rams were like desperate to get rid of Jared Goff. And I think that the Lions, they need more picks or they need to go with a quarterback. If Justin Fields falls to them, I think that they should take him. Otherwise, they should trade out.
Evan, my last question for you. Who is your dark horse of the draft? The person that maybe will be the sneaky good pick?
Yeah, that's let me think here for a second. I think that the Clemson running back Travis Etienne, he's not a sleeper, but I think that he is a sleeper to go a lot earlier in the draft than people think. I think he's got a chance to go in the top 20. He's usually mocked like right around the first, second turn. And I think he might actually go in the top 20. Also, Jalen Phillips, who I mentioned a little bit earlier, the defensive edge rusher from Miami, Florida, I think he might go a lot earlier than people anticipate. I think that J.C. Horn, the South Carolina cornerback, is a guy that could go actually in the top 10 and could be the first defensive player selected. But yeah, I mean, those guys kind of come to mind.
Evan, my last question for you is Trevor Lawrence. We'd be remiss not to talk about the expected number 1 overall pick. Some pundits call him Justin Herbert plus, which is incredible. Herbert, of course, the offensive rookie of the year. Mm-hmm. But I've even heard people say he's the best quarterback prospect in a draft since Andrew Luck in 2012. Do you think that highly of Lawrence?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, wow. I remember watching him as a freshman. A lot of people do. I mean, he's played in tons of big games. He is, 6'6", 213 with a cannon arm. He's amazing, an excellent athlete. He's got big hands. He's, he runs, he averaged 30 rushing yards per start in college. He's the kind of guy that can go to Jacksonville and elevate their offense right away. Jacksonville actually has an underrated offensive line. They're bringing back all 5 starters. They've got DJ Chark. They've got Laviska Shenault, who's just a nasty talent. And I think that James Robinson had a great rookie year at running back. He's the kind of guy who could elevate them from being, a bottom 5 offense last year to all of a sudden being like a top 15 offense. He's going to make the offensive line look better. He's going to make everyone look better. That's what Andrew Luck did when he went to Indianapolis. He did not arrive in Indianapolis with, stellar talent around him. He wound up elevating that talent and making everyone around him look better. I think Trevor Lawrence will have the same impact in Jacksonville.
That's awesome to hear. Exciting to see where these guys go in the first couple spots. I also have to thank you, Evan. As a Packer fan, I really enjoyed your most recent guest appearance on Roto Underworld, dissecting why the Bears still suck. So thank you for that. That was a good listen.
That was Evan a fun Silva. One to write up.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us on Unleashed. We appreciate it. Enjoy your draft weekend.
Thanks, guys.